procedures in parasitology. Now, when we are studying the diagnostic procedures in parasitology, we are supposed to understand each and every diagnostic methods which are used for the diagnosis of parasitic infections. So basically, as we have studied in the previous lectures, parasitology has been divided into protozoology, unicellular parasites, and helminths, which are metacellular parasites. Now, basically, we are going through all these different organisms together to understand the different methods used in parasitology for diagnosis. Okay. So, what is the purpose of these diagnostic methods? In case of any other infection, not only of parasitology, the first important purpose is to confirm the clinical suspicion. Whatever the clinician suspects, if you are suspecting a parasite infection, we have to confirm it so that we can treat the patient properly. Second important purpose is identification of unsuspected infection. If you are not able to identify, if you are not able to approach the proper diagnosis, by doing these technical procedures, we can reach the diagnosis of the infection. It may be of bacterial infection, viral infection, fungal infection, as well as parasitic infection. So the second purpose of every diagnostic procedure is identification of unsuspected infections. So if you look into the different procedures which are involved in the diagnosis of infection, all the technical procedures are one and the same. If you consider bacteriology, virology, mycology, or parasitology, the technical laboratory procedures start with the collection of sample, go for microscopy, go for identification of the organism, then you go for the different important tests such as serological test, and ultimately our aim is to diagnose the case by identifying the organism. Now, technically speaking, all the techniques are one and the same, but each individual technique has its own significance. As for example, in bacteriology, just observing the organism in the specimen does not suffice the diagnosis. We are supposed to cultivate it, isolate it, identify on the basis of biochemical reactions, and then confirm it as a positive agent of the disease. Similarly, if you consider virology, we are supposed to observe the typical appearance of the viral infection in the cells, particularly in microscopy. In the same way, in parasitology, all these techniques are one and the same, but the significance of each individual technique is different from bacteriology and virology. As for example, in parasitology, the technical aspect, first important technical aspect, which is microscopy, it is very, very, very important because it will give a specific diagnosis of the infection by observing the organism, by observing the parasite, by observing the particular stage of the parasite in the specimen. So morphological identification is very important in parasitology. If you consider it the same way in bacteriology, morphological significance is less. Cultivation and identification is more important in bacteriology. So here in this case, in parasitology, morphological identification is very important. Cultivation is least important because we usually do not cultivate the organism for identification. They are completely identified on the basis of microscopy and macroscopy. So microscopy remains the mainstay in the diagnosis of parasitological infections. Okay, then serological reactions, they are least important. Only where we do not observe the organisms in microscopy, we go for serological diagnosis, detection of antigens, detection of antibodies, or detection of nucleic acid. So that means here the format is slightly changed with respect to the techniques which are important, the significance of techniques. Microscopy plays the major role, and culture is least important. Whereas serological reaction, they are less important as compared to the morphological identification. Okay. Now, before that, here we are going to study. Now, before going to this particular part, I would just focus your attention to the importance of the specimen. Because in parasitology, most of the infections are intestinal infections. Now, if you just consider protozoology, there are most organisms which are intestinal parasites. Entamoeba histolytica, Giardia lamblia, Trichomonas vaginalis, then Isospora bailey, Cryptosporidium parvum. All these cause intestinal infection. Okay, but only a few of them they cause blood infection or other types of infection. At the same time, if you consider helminthology, maximum of the helminthic parasite they cause intestinal infection. Just if you exclude filariasis, rest other helminthic parasite they lead to intestinal infection. So when we are going to the study of diagnostic procedures, the first and foremost important specimen which is to be collected is the feces, which has a great importance in the diagnosis of parasitology, because 90% of the parasitic infections, they are intestinal. Only a few of them, they are either blood infections or lymphatic infections or subcutaneous infections. That will go into details. So our focus of today's topic will be mostly on the examination of feces for the diagnosis of parasitic infections. Okay. Now, in the first 4 to 5 slides, I will be projecting the schematic method how we are going to study today's topic. First will be the sample collection, particularly feces. With other other parasitic infection, we will also study the sample collection with that particular parasite. Then, particularly in feces, we are going to study how the sample is to be collected. Macroscopic examination of the stool, what we observe in the stool, particularly with respect to helminths, which are metazoan parasite, larger parasite. Some parasite, they release the segments such as tapeworm in the stool. Some of the adult worms, they may be excised out from the feces. Those adult worms can also be observed macroscopically. So this macroscopic appearance or macroscopic examination is also important for identification of infection. Then we'll go to microscopic examination. Here we are going to study direct wet mount, in which we are going to study two important methods: saline preparation and iodine preparation. We are going to go into the details of that in the successive slides. But in direct wet mount, what we are supposed to understand is the presence of different cells, presence of crystals, and the presence of parasites. When we say the presence of parasite, it may be in the form of trophozoite or cyst in case of protozoa, or it may be in the form of eggs and larvae with respect to helminthic infection. So that two important techniques, wet mount, we are going to study in detail in the successive slides. After that, concentration method. Concentration method for stool particularly. Why? Because sometimes usually what happens, if the infection is not very heavy in the intestine, the forms of the parasite may not be detected in microscope because they are scanty in number. In that case, to increase the number of parasite, either in the trophozoite form or in the cystic form or the larvae or the eggs, we are supposed to concentrate the stool sample so that it becomes much more evident because of concentration of the stool specimen. Those concentration methods also we are going to go into the details in the later slides. Then permanent stains smears. We can also stain the slides permanently so that we can observe or we can preserve the slides for further reference. Then, examination of other specimens, particularly with respect to intestinal infection, we can collect special anal swabs, particularly with Enterobius vermicularis, sigmoidoscopic material, duodenal aspirate, sputum, urine, urogenital specimen. These are the other specimens which can be collected when there is an intestinal infection. Okay. Then, after that, examination of blood for blood parasites, particularly with malarial parasite and filariasis. In this malarial parasite, we are going to study the thick and thin smear and the staining procedures. Staining procedures, we are not going to go into the details of that because they are much more evidently taught in pathology. So at least we'll go through the technical method why for the thick and thin smears are prepared. In microfilaria, we are going to see the wet mount and the stain preparations. Then after that, examination of tissue and aspirate. Some specimens are very important, such as skin, lymph node, liver aspirate, bone marrow, CSF, and other biopsy specimens. Then later, other methods for the study, cultivation. In cultivation, we are not going to go into the details how the parasites are cultivated because it has no much importance for identification, because identification is solely based on microscopic appearance of the parasite. If you want to go for a research purpose, we can go for cultivation of some parasites. I'll mention some of the important parasites which are being studied in detail and the cultivation method for them. Animal inoculation. Nowadays, animal inoculation has been banned. Only by particular certain permissions we can use animals for the laboratory detection of pathogenicity and the effect of the parasite. That also we are not going to go into much details. I'll just tell some of the important ones. And in immunodiagnosis, where we usually study the serological test for antibody detection, antigen detection, and immunological test for detection of hypersensitivity, that is intradermal test. These are the tests which we will be observing at the end. So this is the schematic method how parasitology undergoes the technical diagnostic procedures. Okay. Now, firstly, we'll start with examination of feces. Now, when we say examination of feces, particularly with respect to parasitology, definitely, as I've told you previously, protozoology and helminthology are the two sections. The fecal specimen is to be examined for both of these parasites. Now, in the case of protozoa, the stages which are found in the stool specimen, they are the trochozoite and the cystic form of Entamoeba histolytica, Giardia lamblia, Trichomonas vaginalis, and the oocyst. They may be present in the stool of Cyclospora, Cryptosporidium, Isospora, these parasites. Whereas the stages of helminths, which are usually found in the stool, they are eggs and the larvae. Microscopically, we can observe the eggs and the larvae in the stool specimen. But macroscopically, we can also observe the presence of adult worms, particularly with the larger helminthic worms, roundworm, hookworm, Enterobius vermicularis, tapeworm even sometimes, or the segments of tapeworm, they may be seen by naked eyes. So the adult worms and segments of tapeworm, they are usually visible to naked eyes. But the eggs, larvae, cyst, oocyst, and trochozoites can be seen only with microscope. That means microscopy remains the mainstay for the diagnosis of parasitological infections, protozoology as well as helminthology. Okay. Now, in order to see these structures, the fecal material must be properly collected. And so sample collection is a very important step for identification of these organisms, of these parasites. Okay. Now, sample collection. Specimen is to be collected in a clean and dry container without antiseptic. Antiseptics, they have an adverse effect on the trophozoites and the adult worms in the helminths, trophozoites in the protozoan parasites. They may sometimes destroy the cysts even of protozoan parasites. So usually the container should be a clean, dry container, a wide mouth container. Okay. Now, the stool specimen must be fresh, uncontaminated by urine, dirt, water, or any other body secretion such as the menstrual blood. Presence of menstrual blood or contamination with menstrual blood may mislead to the diagnosis of ulcerative infection in the intestine. And that's why it should not be contaminated with the feces. Because if the blood is seen in the feces, we suspect for ulcerative condition in the bowel while observing under the microscope. We may not be observing the intestine of the patient, but clinical evidence may go to a misdiagnosis of ulcerative condition. That's why usually the specimen should not be contaminated, not even with urine specimen. Okay. Specimen obtained by enema or laxative are often positive for ova or adult worms. Now, enterobiasis is best diagnosed by using scraping of the anal and perianal region by NIH swab. Why this has been highlighted? Because enterobius, definitely it causes intestinal infection. But the site of localization of this parasite is the vermiform appendix, from where the parasite crawls from the anus to the perianal region. And that's why the eggs may not be seen in the feces. In that condition, the diagnosis may be missed. And so, if you just collect the perianal swab, where the adult worm as well as the eggs of the Enterobius vermicularis, they may be isolated by the NIH swab. NIH swab, National Institute of Health swab, which contains a cellophane attached at the end, which will be rubbed on the perianal region, and the eggs or parasite, they stick to the cellophane tape. So this is how the diagnosis of enterobiasis is done instead of collecting feces. Now, the specimen of stool may be collected with a preservative. Very often, if there is a delay in the processing of the specimen, usually it has to be collected in a preservative. Formalin is one of the important preservatives which is commonly used for collection of stool specimen. There are many other preservatives. I won't go into the details of that. But remember, these are some of the important points which you are supposed to understand during collection of specimen. Okay? Particularly, you have to focus your attention to the clinical history of the patient with respect to enterobiasis, where there is itching at the perianal region, so that you can select a proper technique for collection of specimen. Okay. Now, macroscopic appearance. Macroscopically, first important thing which you are supposed to observe is the presence of mucus. Now, we are collecting the fecal specimen. Mucus is said to be present always in the intestine. That means mucus, to a certain extent, is always a content of feces. But this mucus should not be contaminated with blood. So if you observe mucoid blood-stained stool, it is usually found in acute cases of dysentery, amoebic dysentery, bacillary dysentery, or rarely it may be seen in uremia, hemorrhagic colitis, and colonic or rectal cancers or polyps. So that means the inflammation and release of blood in the intestine means the ulcerative condition due to any of these particular infections or malignancies. So mucus in that condition is excessively secreted in the intestine, which is stained with blood. Secondly, purulent blood stains too. It is usually seen in ulcerative colitis and chronic colitis. Maybe due to bacterial infection, maybe due to viral infection, or maybe even due to parasitic infection. Particularly in viral infections, cytomegalovirus infection leads to acute colitis, where blood is seen in the, or pus and blood is seen in the feces. Amoebic colitis, purulent blood may be seen. So such conditions may reveal the presence of purulent blood-stained stool. So this is first important character which you have to observe macroscopically. Secondly, the presence of parasite, particularly with respect to the larger parasite, helminthic parasite, roundworms, threadworms, whipworm, hookworm, and various other intestinal flukes, liver fluke, and other Clonorchis sinensis. These may be excreted along with the feces, and they may be seen macroscopically. Now, the first figure that shows the segment of tapeworm when present in the stool may be seen by naked eyes. This segment is the gravish segment of the tapeworm, Taenia ceruleum, Taenia saginata. We can collect it, place it onto a slide, and even if we can go for the microscopic diagnosis of the particular species. We have studied how the segments are, what are the different morphological details which we are supposed to observe, particularly with respect to the reproductive system, the number of testes, the number of uterus. These are important for identification of the species. So macroscopically, we can see the segment, and microscopically, we can identify the particular genus and species of tapeworm. The second figure shows the presence of adult worm, Ascaris lumbricoides. In the similar manner, even ankylostoma can be isolated. Threadworm, pinworm, whipworm, they can be isolated from the feces. We can observe it macroscopically. Okay. Now, examination of the feces by microscope. As I've told you, this is the most important technique in parasitology for diagnosis of infection. The first important feature about microscope. Secondly, the direct wet mount, saline preparation and iodine preparation. These are the two important techniques which you are supposed to do during your final examination. And that's why you are supposed to understand these two techniques very properly. They are not very difficult, very simple techniques, but you have to remember that and signify what you are doing during your practical examination. So firstly, we'll start with saline preparation and then we'll go to the iodine preparation. Simple technique. Take 1 to 2 drops of saline on a clean grease-free slide. Mix a small amount of feces to make a thin film. You can see the first diagram on the top, and place a cover slip over it. I think this is not a very difficult task. Okay, this makes the saline preparation complete. But while doing this preparation, it is important that you collect the proper specimen in a proper amount so that it becomes a very thin film. And during that, if you properly emulsify the suspension in saline, the eggs or cysts, they are separated, and that becomes much easier for us to observe under the microscope. And that's why it has to be emulsified very uniformly, and then only the cover slip has to be placed without air bubbles, definitely. Second preparation is similar to the first one of saline preparation. Just we are going to add 1 to 2 drops of Lugol's iodine. Take a clean grease-free slide, place 1 to 2 drops of saline, add 1 to 2 drops of Lugol's iodine to it, and mix a small amount of feces to make a thin film. and place a cover slip over it. Here only the change is you are adding just 1 to 2 drops of leukocyte. And then you can observe this slide under the microscope. Remember, so sorry we had lost the connection. Am I audible now to all of you? Please, any one of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the particular slide and then we'll continue. Okay. Now, in this case, both the preparations, saline preparation and iodine preparation, they have to be made on the same slide during your examination. Remember this. And how it is done, I'll show it to you in the next slide. Here, both the preparations, they are made on the same slide. On the left side is the saline preparation and on the right side is the iodine preparation. Now, when you make such preparation, you are supposed to observe under the microscope, firstly under the 10x objective. And later on, when you observe a particular spherical or oval structure, bring it into the center and just tilt the high power objective, 45x, so that you can focus properly the internal details of the structure which you are observing. Now let me clarify some important part regarding the saline preparation and iodine preparation. Definitely saline preparation reveals all the different forms of the parasites. Propozoids, cyst, even the oocyst can be observed properly. At the same time, eggs of helminth and larvae can also be observed under the saline preparation. That means saline preparation can be done particularly to observe parasitic infection. But the iodine preparation particularly is done for the cyst of protozoan parasites. Remember, a tackling question is usually asked by the examiners. What is the significance of iodine preparation? It is meant for the detection of internal details of the cyst of protozoan parasite. In protozoan parasite, the cyst contains glycogen mass, it contains fat globules, they are stained with iodine. Now, this iodine preparation usually has nothing to do with the helminthic eggs. Why? Because in the helminthic egg, if you have understood properly, two types of eggs are produced by the parasite: bile stained eggs and non-bile stained eggs. Those eggs which are bile stained, they are naturally either brown or yellowish brown in color. So it does not need any staining technique. Whereas non-bile stained eggs, they are not necessary to stain them. We are supposed to identify them as non-bile stain. That's why their original character, which appears grayish in color, under saline preparation, that much is sufficient for the identification. So for eggs, usually it is not done. But if you are observing the eggs, even the iodine may stain some of the internal details of the eggs. But remember, it is not specifically done for helminthic eggs. It is particularly done for the detection of internal details of the cysts of the protozoan parasite. Okay? So, while observing under the low power, firstly focus a spherical or oval object, because all the cysts, they are either spherical or oval in shape. At the same time, the eggs, they are either oval or spherical. At low power, you may not be able to identify the parasite or the egg because it is under low power. But as you focus it onto the high power, you can identify the internal details of the eggs, internal details of the cyst. And that is the method how you are supposed to identify under saline and iodine preparation. Okay? Then, what else are you supposed to observe in the microscope in spite of the stages of parasite? Cellular elements. First, cells, they are indicative of ulcerative condition in the intestine. RBCs, most importantly, we have discussed previously also. It is found in ulcero-inflammatory conditions of bowel and in bleeding from colon and rectum, particularly in malignancy and polyps. Macrophages, often they are present only in bacterial descent or bacillary descent. They are not usually present in amoebic descent. Whereas epithelial cells, they are increased in number in certain inflammatory conditions of the bowel. It may be due to bacterial infection or parasitic infection. And most importantly, detection of crystals, particularly the crystals which are called as Charcot-Leyden crystals, which are present in amoebic dysentery. Now these crystals, these are usually elongated needle-like structures. They are diamond shaped and they are hexagonal on cross section. Such Charcot-Leyden crystals which are present in amoebic dysentery is a very characteristic feature of amoebiasis, intestinal amoebiasis, acute cases of amoebiasis. Then, here I have shown some of the important ones in saline and iodine preparation. Propozoids consist of Entamoeba histolytica on the top in saline preparation and iodine preparation. On the left side, I have shown on the lower side the tropozoid of Giardia and the cyst of Giardia. You can see that the internal glycogen mass of the cyst, they are very prominently stained by iodine. Even we can observe the tropozoids of Trichomonas vaginalis when we study the stool specimen infected. the significance of concentration method is important only when you are not able to observe any stage of the parasite in the feces, but still you are suspecting the infection of parasite. Okay, now in that case, you are supposed to concentrate the stool material. Concentration means increasing the number of specimen in the stool, whether it is cyst or eggs. You are supposed to increase the number by different techniques so that it becomes much more easier for us to undergo microscopy for identification. Now, in that, two important techniques are there: flotation method and sedimentation method. I won't go into the details of these. I'll just enumerate them and then we go to the next slide. Flotation technique, which implies a suspension which has a density less than that, more than that of the eggs, so that the eggs, they float onto the surface of that suspension. For example, the first one, saturated salt solution. So, common salt, sodium chloride, it is mixed in the water and a concentrated suspension is made. But this concentrated suspension has a high density as compared to the density of the eggs or cyst. In that case, because of the low density, these float on the surface. I won't go into the details how it is done because it will take a very long time. That's why I'll just mention the significance. When they float on the surface, we collect it on the cover slip, put it onto the slide and observe it so that we can identify the parasite. At the same time, zinc sulfate centrifugal flotation method is also used, where zinc sulfate has a high density as compared to the eggs or cyst of some of the parasites. Now, in this technique, the only difference is here centrifugation is done after emulsion, making an emulsion of the stool specimen, so that the larger coarse particles of the feces, they settle at the bottom, and only the eggs which have a low density as compared to the solution, they float onto the surface. Now, which are the particular eggs which are not seen in flotation method? All helminthic eggs, they float, except unfertilized eggs of Ascaris, where the ovum is atrophied, becomes heavy. Eggs of Tinea, they are heavy in the density. And eggs of all intestinal flukes, Cassiola hepatica, Clonorchis sinensis, then oriental lung fluke, Paragonimus westermani. All these eggs, they are heavy as compared to the density of zinc sulfate, and that's why they sink at the bottom. Now, sedimentation method is the reverse of this. Here, the specimen is sedimented at the bottom. Now, firstly, a simple sedimentation technique was used where the specimen was mixed in saline, uniformly mixed, and then it was strained through a gauze having 40 meshes per inch, so that the coarse particles of the feces, they remain back, whereas the filtrate contains the eggs. Now, this type of mixing and straining was done 4 to 5 times so that we get a clear suspension, and then it was centrifuged. Now, this was a very crude method in which the amount of eggs, they were not properly concentrated. For that, formal ether concentration method was introduced. Now, this technique where formal suspension is used to emulsify the feces, and after emulsification, it is strained through the gauze containing 40 meshes per inch, so that the coarse particles, they are removed. Now to this suspension, we add 4 to 5 ml of ether, because of which the suspension becomes of a low density. Remember, here the density of the suspension becomes less. And after that, when it is centrifuged, all the eggs, they get sedimented at the bottom of the tube. And now you can easily decant the supernatant and just collect 1 or 2 drops of the sediment in which the eggs or cyst may be present. Particularly the eggs which are heavy, they immediately settle at the bottom. Those that are not seen in flotation method, they are seen in the sedimentation method. Okay. Now, permanent stain preparations. Now, I'll just run up with some of the slides because these are not that very important for us. But for preserving the specimen, permanent stain preparations are very, very important, particularly with respect to protozoal infections. As for example, the first technique of staining is modified Ziehl-Neelsen staining. Now, this modified Ziehl-Neelsen staining is the same staining technique which is used for tuberculosis. There are 2 important differences in that. The very first important difference is heating process is not done as it is done in tuberculosis, because the stain immediately penetrates into the oocyst or sporocyst of Cyclospora and Isospora, the parasites, protozoan parasite. So heating process is not required. And second important difference is the use of decolorizing agent. In case of protozoal staining, modified Ziehl-Neelsen staining, 1% sulfuric acid is used as a decolorizing agent. Unlike tuberculosis, where 20% sulfuric acid has to be used. So for protozoa cyst or sporocyst, we use only 1% of sulfuric acid as a decolorizing agent. Counter stain remains the same, methylene blue or malachite. Okay. So this is how we stain with modified Ziehl-Neelsen staining. Giemsa staining, you have studied in more detail even in pathology. It is done for detection of tachyzoids of toxoplasma. Then iron hematoxylin stain, again a staining method which is more detailed dealt with in pathology. I have shown 2 diagrams, the tropozoite and cystic form of Entamoeba histolytica, which are stained with iron hematoxylin stain. The third stain is Whitley trichome stain. Here I have shown the tropozoite of Naegleria fowleri, a free-living amoeba. So these are some of the important permanent staining methods used to stain the protozoal and protozoal parasite, whichever form it is, tropozoite, cystic form or oocyst. Okay. Then examination of other specimen, perianal specimen, as we have discussed in the previous topic. NIH anal swab for Enterobius vermicularis, sigmoidoscopic material, scraping or aspirated material from mucous surface of the sigmoid colon, particularly with acute cases of Entamoeba histolytica, where tropozoites are usually seen in the sigmoidoscopic material. Duodenal aspirate, a very important site where most of the parasites, they are in a live state. Strongyloides turceralis, the larvae. Eggs of Clonarchus sinensis, Fasciola hepatica, which resides in the biliary passage, and Giardia, Isospora, Cryptosporidium. All these can be detected from the duodenal aspirate. Urine, particularly with respect to helminthic infection in trematodes, Schistosoma hematobium. The site of localization is the urinary bladder, venous plexus of the urinary bladder. and the eggs of Schistosoma hematobium may be seen in the urine of infected patient. Propozoids of Trichomonas, which causes vaginitis. Urogenital specimen, propozoids of Trichomonas vaginitis. And even sputum in case of intestinal infection. Remember, here we are studying at this stage intestinal infection. But even in certain conditions of intestinal infection, we can also collect sputum particularly for detection of rabbitiform larvae of Ascaris, which crawls from the lungs into the respiratory tract. Then Strongyloides stercoralis, Ankylostoma duodenale, and Cystostors bucales. Then detection of pulmonary paragonymous infection and propozoids of Entamoeba histolytica. They may be seen in the sputum. Then the second specimen, we have completed feces. Now the second specimen is the blood. Most importantly, we are supposed to understand the indications when we are supposed to do the blood examination, particularly with respect to some of the blood parasites. Usually, the blood smears, they are useful for the detection of parasites such as malarial parasite. We can identify different stages of the parasite. Okay. So what specimen is to be collected in which infection? That is very important. Particularly with respect to blood, we can prepare blood smear, which is important in malarial parasite infection, microfilaria detection in filarias. Third is, it is not Trichomonas. I'm very sorry, it is misprinted by me. It is Trypanosoma infection. You may correct it if you have downloaded the PowerPoint. So it is not Trichomonas, it is Trypanosoma infection, trypanosomiasis. Then other specimen, bone marrow and splenic aspirate in Kala Azar, that is Leishmania donovani. CSF for chronic African trypanosomiasis. And specimens which are collected, particularly blood. It should be the fresh blood collected from capillary blood of the finger or ear lobes. You can also collect venous blood in EDTA anticoagulant. Now, this is very important why I have projected this slide purposefully, because suspicion of a particular infection depends upon the clinical appearance of the case. And when you suspect a particular infection, the duration at which the specimen has to be collected is also different. I've given some of the important ones which are more prevalent in India. And according to that, when you suspect a particular type of infection, the sample collection also has a specific time period or duration. For example, in malarial parasite infection, which is very common in India, the peripheral blood has to be collected. Peripheral blood smear is to be collected 1 to 2 hours after the peak of fever. If you have understood the pathogenicity of this parasite, a fever comes when the erythrocytes, they are lysed, which release the pyrogen. And due to the lysis of erythrocytes, the particular stages of the parasite, they are released, because of which the fever appears. Now, this fever attains a particular peak for a particular time, during which the released trophozoites or whichever form is released, it infects a new cell, peripheral blood cell, and appears in the blood circulation as the fever starts subsiding. And that is why After 1 to 2 hours of the peak of fever, the parasite appears in the red blood cells in the peripheral blood. And when you collect the specimen at that particular time, after 1 to 2 hours of the peak of fever, there are high chances of detecting malarial parasites in the peripheral. At the same time, Kala-Azar, the peripheral blood smear is usually taken during the daytime for the detection of LD bodies, mastigote forms of Leishmania donovans. Sleeping sickness, trypanosomiasis. The trypomastigote forms, they are seen in acute phase of infection. In filariasis, Vaucheria bancrofti and Brugia malai, usually they have a nocturnal periodicity. When you collect the blood specimen during 10 p.m. to 4 p.m., they are seen in the peripheral blood. During daytime, you may not be able to detect the presence of these malarial parasites in the peripheral blood, the microfilaria. Okay? Then, malarial parasite, and even for microfilaria, thick and thin smear, they are prepared. Thick smear, not necessary to describe, 1 drop of finger prick blood sample is placed on a slide and it is spread uniformly into a thick smear so that large number of cells may be observed at a time. Whereas the second is the thin smear, where we prepare a thin film of the blood cell by taking 1 small drop of blood on the slide on one side and spreading it with another glass slide, so that a very thin uniform film is prepared. The significance of this is the thick smear is prepared to detect whether parasitic infection is present or not, particularly with microfilaria, that is filariasis, presence of microfilaria in the blood, or the presence of malarial parasite. We may not be able to identify the particular infection, identify the particular species of Plasmodium in the thick smear. But as we are able to observe large number of cells together in a single field, it may reveal the presence of the parasite. This is the significance of thick smear. But the thin film is very important for the identification of the parasite, particularly with respect to the malarial parasite and the microfilaria. We can observe the details in one individual cell and we can identify the species as well. For the staining techniques, Wright stain, Leishman stain, Giemsa stain and GSB stain, they can be used. And what you are supposed to observe, particularly in case of malarial parasite, the different stages, the ring form and the amoeboid form may be seen, the schizont may be seen, and the gametocytes. I won't go into the details, we may lose some of the slides later on. Just remember, these are the important stages which we can observe by staining the slide for malarial parasites. Similarly, microfilaria, we can identify the parasite. We can identify the microfilaria, whether it is sheathed microfilaria, unsheathed microfilaria. Even we can identify the species after staining by observing under 100x. Okay. Then, in case of microfilaria, as we have seen previously, blood collection, nocturnal periodicity, blood is collected between 10 p.m. to 4 p.m. Now, another important feature, if you are not able to collect the blood during this period, and if you want to collect it during the daytime, what we are supposed to do is, we give or we provocate the parasite to come into the peripheral blood by giving DEC provocation, that is diethyl carbamazine, hetrazam. Just give 100 mg of DEC and induce the appearance of microfilaria in the blood after 20 to 30 minutes of the dose. Even in the daytime, it will appear in the peripheral blood. And this can be observed by unstained preparation, or it may be stained by Leishman stain, Giemsa stain, and hematoxylin eosin stain. Here, the first is the unstained preparation of microfilaria, and the three other methods I've shown here. Now, the examination of tissues and aspirates. There are different other specimens apart from feces and blood with respect to parasitology. But those specimens depends upon the type of infection, the organ involved, and the clinical manifestation. We have to correlate them together. Specimen and preparation depends upon the suspected parasite and the type of specimen to be examined. Okay. Other specimens which are important, they are lymph node biopsy, splenic puncture, needle aspirate of spleen and liver, sternal puncture, duodenal aspirate, bronchoalveolar lavage, bronchial washings. These are some of the important specimens which can be collected, and they can be observed under the microscopy depending upon the type of suspected case. Direct microscopy can be done by staining it with Giemsa stain or methenamine silver stain, which is important in the detection of Leishmania and Trypanosoma infection. Now, how do we suspect these cases? For example, what specimen is to be collected in particular infection? Aspirates of cyst and abscesses is done for detection of amoebae. Duodenal aspirate for Giardia lamblia, Strongyloides cercoralis, Cryptosporidium parvum, Microsporidium. Bone marrow aspirate for the detection of a mastigote form, that is LD bodies of Leishmania, Trypanosoma cruzi, or Plasmodium species. They are stained by Giemsa staining. Bronchial aspirate, it is done for detection of Pneumocystis xerovesi, Cryptosporidium parvum, and Toxoplasma gondii. Biopsy specimen, we are going to go a little fast. Jejunal biopsy can be done for Cryptosporidium species, detection of Cryptosporidium, the oocyst, stained with Giemsa stain. Tissue sections for Pneumocystis xerovesi, where impression smear can be stained with Graham-Wright stain, methylamine silver stain. Skin snips can be collected, particularly with respect to Onchocerca volvulus, which causes infection of the eyes, giving rise to onchosarcoma. Skin biopsies can be collected. Muscle tissue, particularly with respect to tissue parasite, that is Trichinella spiralis, which causes a cyst inside the muscles. And then bladder muscle biopsy can be collected for schistosomiasis, eggs of parasites. So these are some of the biopsy material which can be collected for the detection of different types of infections, parasitic infections. And CSF, particularly with respect to the free-living amoebae and Trypanosoma. Free-living amoebae, the trophozoite forms of Naegleria, Powderi, Acanthamoeba, and Trypanosoma. They can be collected. Then, other methods of study, cultivation. As I've told you, cultivation, we are not going to go into the details of how the parasites they are cultivated. I'll just mention some of them which are under research and study. Intestinal protozoan parasite. Balamut's aqueous egg yolk infusion medium is used for the cultivation of amoebae and other intestinal protozoan parasites, such as Giardia. Boak's and Droblov's block egg serum is the medium used for the cultivation of amoebae. And the third is Novi McNeil Nichols medium, which is called as NNN medium, used for the cultivation of Leishmania and Trypanosoma. Okay. Then animal inoculation. As I've told you, animal inoculation is carried out only in those particular laboratories. Those have the permission to use animals as experimental animals. They have to take a permission from the government to use animals for experimental use. And for that, when we are considering the cultivation of these parasitic infections in animals for the study, in case of Leishmania, we use young hamster, 2 to 3 months old. In trypanosomes, rat, mice, and guinea pigs, they can be used. In Toxoplasma, all common laboratory animals can be used, including the rabbit, hamster, guinea pig. Then, lastly, the immunodiagnosis, detection of antibodies. We are not going to go into the details of each of these because we have already studied the principle of all these techniques in serological reaction. Now, these tests for the detection of antibodies, wherever necessary, they are used according to the type of suspected infection. And for antibody detection, complement fixation test is there, indirect heme agglutination test, ELISA, which is very common for each and every type of parasitic infection as well. Counter immunoelectrophoresis is done. Immunofluorescence test can be done for the detection of antibodies. For the detection of antigen, immunofluorescence assay, direct fluorescent antibody test, then BF test, enzyme immunoassay, and immunoblotting test can be done for the detection of antigen. In molecular methods for the detection of nucleic acid, PCR has become a very common technique for the detection of nucleic acid, whether it is a DNA or a RNA. And the most important immunological test, which is often done, but now it has been banned because of the hazard of infection. That is intradermal test. Cassonis test, which is done for the diagnosis of immediate hypersensitivity in hydatid disease caused by Echinococcus. 0.2 ml of hydatid fluid is directly injected intradermally, and after 2 hours, we observe for an immediate hypersensitivity reaction with the development of wheal and flare reaction. This indicates the hypersensitivity towards the antigen of Echinococcus. Now, actually, this is a very crude method, and also it is dangerous. Sometimes we may inject even the scoliosis intradermal, and so these tests, they have been banned. The second test, Montegro test, which is done for the detection of Leishmania donovani infection. Here it is the detection of delayed hypersensitivity to Leishmania antigen. The reaction appears after 48 to 72 hours. Again, the same hazard of getting infected with the parasite. So intradermal tests using crude antigens has been banned nowadays. But for study, you are supposed to understand these tests, which are done for the detection of hypersensitivity towards the antigens of the parasite. So that's all for the topic of today.